So I saw a smaller film that came out very recently that I think is falling under the radar for a lot of people, and it's called Sovereign, starring Nick Offerman and Jacob Tremblay, and I think it's worth your time. So the film is based on a true story, but I'm not going to get into too much detail about the plot itself because I went into this not knowing a whole lot about what happened aside from a few details here and there that I recall. But the gist of it is that it follows a father and son who are a part of the sovereign citizens movement, which operates under a very sort of flimsy understanding between the relationship between a private citizen and the federal government. And it sort of follows this relationship as the father, played by Nick Offerman, is sort of kind of being crushed under the weight of all this stuff that he has going on between the debt that he owes and the government being on his back and all these sort of seminars that he's trying to sell to people that sort of promote this movement and his sort of services as someone who can like help get rid of debt uh, for a lot of desperate people, um, while also kind of dealing with his sort of encounters with the law and how that is sort of affecting his relationship with his son, played by Jacob Tremblay. And while there's certainly a lot of political factors that sort of inform the context around the movie and the characters, the film is mostly focused just on this relationship, and I think it's all the better for it. It's very focused, and it is presenting these characters without a whole lot of judgment towards what they're doing and how they operate and what they believe in. Even though it does sort of showcase the gaps in logic in a lot of what they're doing, it is sort of showing them in a way that is very human, and you can see why they're making the decisions that they're making, and the sort of acts of desperation that they do end up taking do kind of make sense when you put yourself in their shoes, and it kind of makes the situation that much more tragic once you see how it all unfolds. And that especially goes for the son because he's sort of at a crossroads in his life where he could very easily start taking steps towards moving on from the grasp of his father and his ideology. But there are just so many circumstances just piling on that kind of end up pulling him more into his father's grasp. And it is really sad to see how it kind of develops over time because you can see the internal conflict within that character. And I think Tremblay does a fantastic job sort of portraying that conflict without necessarily saying a whole lot. And while Tremblay is showcasing a lot of the internal stakes of the film, Offerman is doing the same, but for the external stakes. He is definitely giving a more showy performance, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. He is so commanding of the screen whenever he comes on, and you can see how charismatic he is. Obviously, everyone loves Nick Offerman, but you can see how someone, even who is at a place where he is in his life, where he's not necessarily in the best position, he can have this sort of aura, this presence that can really speak to people who are desperate, who are in these very dire financial situations, and they can see what he's offering with his worldview and see how that can kind of help them and benefit them in the long run, even though a lot of what he's saying is basically nonsense. But I think he is incredibly good in the film, and they both bounce off each other really well. And for a lot of the film, you do just kind of follow these characters in a very slice of life manner, but there's this sort of underlying sense of doom that sort of permeates everything that you see on the screen. You're just kind of waiting for something to happen. And it really isn't until the last 20 minutes or so when it does kind of get into what these two are eventually known for, why they made the news when this incident happened. But when it does hit, it does pack a very big punch, not just in terms of like the things that you see on screen, but just on an emotional level, it really hits. So this is a movie that I think really makes a good impression, and I think it's the feature debut for its filmmaker Christian Swigel. I think. Apologies if I pronounce the name wrong, but it's definitely a promising directorial debut, and I think he does a great job with the characters and the storytelling. So I'm very curious to see where he goes from here. So if you haven't heard of this film, this is definitely one that I think is worth looking out for. It's available on video on demand, and I'm sure it'll pop up on some of the streamers at some point. So if you've seen the film, feel free to let me know what you thought of Sovereign in the comments.